racing to escape Sudan on this Wednesday night.
It was quite horrific.
The harrowing rescues and the Canadians still waiting. Is our military about to help as Sudan teeters on the edge of civil war? Pucks, bucks, and politics.
Let's get her done.
The billion-dollar promise to replace Calgary's Saddledome on the eve of an election. Alarming shortage.
We truly are facing a crisis.
Canada's critical need for family doctors.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. We begin with the thousands of people waiting to be rescued from the fighting in Sudan. Among them, hundreds of Canadians. The government says it is assisting 700 Canadians there. About 180 of them have been airlifted by our allies. Canada's defense minister said today military planes and troops are in the region ready to go in. China got people out by boat. Greece has flown out some of its citizens. The UK has airlifted hundreds of people to safety. The UK, Germany, France, and the US have all sent in military planes. We'll look at Canada's slower response in just a moment. But first, Mike Drolet on what's happening on the ground right now.
The race to get out of Sudan is down to the wire, with the window closing on a 3-day ceasefire. The first planes filled with elated yet traumatized evacuees have begun landing throughout Europe.
It's difficult to say how stomach-churning it was.
Vesna Vukovic, a Canadian teacher Global News spoke with on the weekend, just arrived in Egypt. That was a hard journey. We're filthy, hungry, and completely dehydrated, she says. She, along with other Canadians, spent 72 hours crammed into a bus after Global Affairs Canada informed them no air evacuations were possible. The Canadian government has since leaned on its allies and just today announced a pair of Canadian C-130s are preparing to enter Sudan.
The Canadian Armed Forces are ready to begin conducting evacuation flights and will do so once conditions on the ground permit.
Meanwhile, anarchy and chaos reign in Khartoum. Complicating matters even more, Ahmed Haroun, a leader of the regime deposed in 2019 who's wanted for war crimes, has escaped from jail.
And now the international community is rushing to save itself and leaving the Sudanese people in the hands of these warring sides.
Calls from the international community for an end to the fighting have been ignored, leaving Sudan on the brink of civil war.
A humanitarian crisis is in the offing in front of our eyes, and only a combined United Nations African Union intervention would help stave off a crisis.
Neighboring countries have already seen tens of thousands of Sudanese refugees cross their borders, and the conflict isn't even 2 weeks old. Mike Drolet, Global News, Toronto.
Our Ottawa Bureau Chief Mercedes Stephenson is with me. Mercedes, U.S. Special Forces went into Sudan 3 days ago. Where is Canada's military and our special forces?
Donna, the Canadian military says a task force has deployed to the nearby African country of Djibouti. It is comprised of both members of the elite and secretive Canadian Special Operations Forces and troops from 1st Canadian Division. They're tasked with evacuating Canadian citizens from Sudan. More troops are also en route from 3rd Royal Canadian Regiment based at CFB Petawawa. As Canada has finally arrived in the region in recent days, there is frustration in the Canadian national security and defense establishment over the speed at which political decisions have been made. Contrary to the government's assertion the conflict came out of left field, high-level national security sources say the government was warned about the deteriorating situation in Sudan and the possible need to evacuate 3 weeks ago through Canadian liaison officers working at U.S. Africa Command. Those sources say Canada had both the contingency plans and the necessary military equipment to pre-position for evacuations of our citizens at that time, as did many of our allies. Donna?
Okay, Mercedes Stephenson in Ottawa, thanks. The head of the Federal Public Service Union wants the Prime Minister to get involved in strike negotiations and accuses the government of stalling on the talks. The strike has gone on for 8 days now. Today, the Treasury Board president called some of the union's demands unaffordable, but insists the government remains at the negotiating table. David Aiken reports.
Shut it down! Shut it down!
Day 8 of the strike, and on the picket line, a heightened sense of frustration and even anger at the government.
I think people are getting tired of waiting this long. I mean, it's expensive for us.
I think they're definitely going to try to drain us out, get us tired. Absolutely, I can see that happening. But again, we're here every day, still showing up.
But there is some frustration on the government side, too.
Yes, it's frustrating to know that Canadians may, as the days come, have more difficulty accessing services, but that's a motivator for everyone to try and resolve this. The union is certainly very aware of Canadians' impatience, and they have to calibrate that carefully.
Now, the union says it has moved a little on outstanding wage issues, though it wouldn't give us details. The government says it is sticking to its offer of a 9% raise over 3 years, which it believes is as much as the taxpayer can afford right now. But that offer is not good enough, and that seems to be where the negotiations are stuck at this point. One final note, so far, no indication that the government is contemplating back-to-work legislation. And, you know, even if they wanted to do that tomorrow, because of the rules around parliamentary procedure, the earliest any such legislation could be debated would be next week. Donna.
David, there's been talk that some people out on strike might still be getting paid. What's going on with that?
I asked the minister in charge of the government's payroll system about this very issue today, and here's what she said.
Employees that continue to offer services will be paid, and those that are on strike will not see that pay on their next paycheck.
So members of the striking union who are essential workers and are still on the job, they will get paid. But those off the job will not get paid, even though they are getting paid today for a pay period that ended 2 weeks ago before the strike started. Donna.
Okay, David, thanks. The federal government has begun its long-promised firearms buyback program. The first phase will focus on 11,000 assault-style firearms and components in the inventory of retailers across the country. As Mackenzie Gray explains, the government is still working to hit its target on tougher gun control.
It's phase one of a signature Liberal promise.
It is an important reflection of our government's commitment to make good on a promise around the launch of a program that will get assault-style firearms, which were designed for a battlefield, out of our communities once and for all.
That program, in agreement with the Canadian Sporting Arms and Ammunition Association, to help the feds buy back certain firearms and other accessories from retailers and distributors. Guns the Liberals prohibited in May 2020 after the mass shooting in Nova Scotia.
These are the first assault-style firearms bought back under the program.
But the government's own partner says they're skeptical of the plan, with the CSAAA pointing out there are no concrete processes or a budget for buying back the estimated 11,000 guns impacted by this measure.
What you see here, it looks meaner, right?
And finding a store that still has these items in stock might be a challenge.
I sold everything before the law, so I don't have anything in stock right now. Even for the handguns, the demand was so big, we sold everything in store.
The Conservatives believe the Liberal plan misses the mark.
Not one single illegal gun will be taken off the streets by Mendocino's announcement today.
But advocates note it's legal guns that have been used in tragedies like Polytechnique and the Quebec mosque attack.
Most mass shootings in Canada are by legal gun owners or with guns that were at one time legally owned.
The next step for the Liberals, expanding the buyback program to individuals, but they'll need to act quickly, Donna. The amnesty order for Canadians who own restricted firearms expires on October 30th.
Mackenzie Gray in Ottawa, thank you. Fans of the Calgary Flames got something new to cheer about last night, or at least the promise of something new. After the last deal for a new arena collapsed, there's a new agreement in principle to replace the Saddledome. The price tag is more than double to $1.2 billion. The majority of that would be paid for with public money from the city and the province. And as Heather Yourex-West reports, one person making the promise is hoping it will help her get elected premier next month.
The Saddledome, an iconic landmark that's perhaps past its prime. The Calgary Flames have been after a new home for years, and after many failed attempts, it seems the NHL team has found public money to help pay for it.
This entertainment hub will feature a new event center and a community arena, along with critical infrastructure required to support growth and development.
The city will pay the largest share of the project's $1.22 billion cost, promising $537 million or 44%. The Flames ownership group will kick in $356 million, while the province will pay $330 million.
Those provincial dollars will go towards infrastructure around the centre, as well as to cover the costs of tearing the aging Saddledome down. But there's a catch. Those funds won't be approved until after the Alberta election next month.
That's why on May 29th, I'm hoping Calgarians give our UCP government a clear mandate to proceed with this arena deal.
With the writ about to drop, this memorandum of understanding was brokered just in time for an election that will be won or lost based on how Calgary votes.
It's critical. The math in Alberta politics, the UCP will have much of rural Alberta locked up. The NDP have most of Edmonton locked up. The NDP will need to pick up at least 15 seats, 10 to 15 seats in Calgary to be knocking at the door of government.
Still, subsidizing arenas is rare in Conservative policy, and when Edmonton was seeking provincial support for Rogers Place, Danielle Smith opposed the use of public funds during the 2012 Alberta race. But it seems this is a different city, a different year, heading into a very different campaign. Heather Yourex-West, Global News, Calgary.
Coming up, how a Chinese attack on Taiwan could grind the global semiconductor sector to a halt. Jailed Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny says he's facing new extremism and terrorism charges that could keep him behind bars for life. Navalny appeared via video link from a penal colony where he's being held. The pretrial hearing lasted several minutes. It's the first time he's been seen in months. Navalny said a new criminal case on terrorism charges has been opened against him, which he says could land him in prison for another 30 years. He's already facing 11 and a half years on a range of charges, which his supporters say are trumped up. The Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and the Chinese President Xi Jinping spoke by phone today, their first contact since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Zelensky says the hour-long conversation was meaningful. Xi called on all sides to reflect on the situation and says he would send a special envoy to Kyiv to serve as a mediator. China has declared itself neutral in Russia's war with Ukraine, but Xi has not hidden his close ties with President Vladimir Putin, nor has he condemned his offensive. Ukraine had been asking to speak with China since Xi's state visit to Moscow last month. There is one component most of us take for granted in modern life, the semiconductor. They are the chips that power everything from mobile phones to electric cars, and the majority of them are made in one place, Taiwan. As Jeff Semple reports, that means if China ever invades Taiwan, it could trigger a global economic meltdown.
This Taiwanese robotics lab offers a glimpse into the future. These arms, equipped with artificial intelligence and 3D cameras, can, in effect, see what they're doing.
Because our robots have eyes, have vision, so they can do great precision in tasks.
From separating recycling to creating computer motherboards. And perhaps their most important job is helping to build semiconductors.
Semiconductor is so important that in the modern world, we cannot live without it.
These tiny computer chips are the brains of modern electronics, powering everything from fridges to fighter jets.
The semiconductor now is like air, to the human being, so it's everywhere. And your camera, your car, and your cell phone, your wash machine, your refrigerator, and not just for the daily life, also for the security or defense for every nation.
This small island nation is a technological giant. Taiwan produces 65% of the world's chips and almost 90% of its advanced chips. But growing tensions with Beijing could threaten that semiconductor supply. If the Chinese military were to invade Taiwan, as U.S. intelligence says it's preparing to do, the semiconductor sector could grind to a halt.
The semiconductor supply chain is fragile.
This analyst works in Taiwan's Hsinchu Science Park, home to the industry's biggest names and manufacturing facilities. He says about a third of materials required for semiconductor production have no other source.
If any invasion happens, then probably the all the traffic will be blocked. The consequence will be very serious because the world cannot react that quickly.
The world got a small taste of a semiconductor shortage during the pandemic. Soaring demand for work-from-home electronics caused a supply crunch for smartphones and cars. Electric vehicles require more than twice as many chips as internal combustion engines, one of many emerging technologies further fueling our chip addiction.
Canada has a significant role to play in the semiconductor industry.
Countries including Canada, the US, and China are scrambling to boost their domestic semiconductor supply, but have a long way to go.
Take semiconductor industry in Taiwan, it took almost more than 50 years. It's not like overnight you can all of a sudden make it happen.
China is the world's largest consumer of semiconductors, but produces less than 20% of its own. Most of its chips are made in Taiwan. Some believe that protects the Taiwanese from attack, what's been dubbed the Silicon Shield.
This has been a godsend for Taiwan. If there were armed conflict in the Taiwan Strait, either an attempted invasion or even a blockade, immediately you would see repercussions in the trillions of dollars for the global economy.
Taiwan's greatest hope for preventing an invasion may also be the smallest. Jeff Semple, Global News, Taipei.
A Taiwanese island that sits even closer to mainland China could become caught in the middle of a conflict. Tomorrow, Jeff explains why its residents fear being on the front line of a brutal war. A dire shortage of family doctors ahead. What's making the job less attractive to medical students? Every year, medical students in Canada get matched with residency positions to train in the medical field they've chosen. It is stressful, competitive, and there are multiple rounds. And now a record number of residents are choosing not to work in family medicine, leaving hundreds of spots vacant. Catherine Ward explains why that is raising concerns.
We truly are facing a crisis in family medicine.
Count yourself lucky if you have easy access to a family doctor.
Our most recent data shows over 2.2 million Ontarians don't have a family physician. And I think what's really concerning about that number is it's actually increased from 1.8 million in the 2 years prior.
Data from the Canadian Resident Matching Service indicates family practice is not a top choice for many in the next generation of medical physicians.
This year in the first round, nearly 1 in 5 family doctor positions went unfilled in the resident matching process. Vacancies in family practice accounted for 3/4 of all unmatched spots. Experts hope more students will match into the field in round 2 as medical students expand their options.
There are many reasons why a match does not happen.
They may have a very limited application profile. They only apply to 4 or 5 locations and maybe only one discipline. And those disciplines might be very high demand.
Family physicians say the job can be a hard sell, citing administrative burdens and stress.
About 57% of family doctors experiencing symptoms of burnout,
leaving those on the front line bearing the brunt of the shortage.
One of the challenge and the trickle downs is the fact that when people don't have timely access to their primary care provider, people use emergency services to get care, whether it's renewing prescription, maintenance of chronic care, and diseases that just go unchecked.
There is hope that many of these family residency positions will be filled in the second round of matching on Thursday, and that doctors who do choose family practice stick it out for the long term.
Family physicians, to do the job well, need to operate in teams with nurse practitioners, with physician assistants, with dietitians, with physios. It needs to cognitively offload the burden, the paperwork, so that we can get them to do what they're good at, which is take care of patients.
Catherine Ward, Global News, Toronto.
To a king. To mark the coronation of King Charles on May the 6th, the British team has created a sweet life-size bust of him. It's all made of chocolate, more than 17 liters of it. It took 130 hours to make over the course of 4 weeks. It weighs 23 kilograms and is embellished with Twix, Milky Way, Galaxy, and Bounty bars. The medals include Snickers, apparently. It's the uniform Charles is expected to wear on his coronation day. Global News will have special coverage of that day, the King's coronation on May 6th. I'll be in London at 5 a.m. Eastern, 2 a.m. Pacific, right here on Global. And that is Global National for this Wednesday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's Your Canada is the Science World Dome in Vancouver. We'd love to see Your Canada. Please email it to viewers@globalnational.com. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you here again tomorrow. Bye-bye.